There's a stretch of gravel road in the Willamette Valley where the land rolls in soft green waves, and if you drive it slow enough, in late summer, you'll smell it before you see it. That dusty, sweet, almost peppery smell of grapes ripening on the vine. Most people driving through don't stop. They're headed somewhere bigger, somewhere with a name on a sign, a fountain out front, and a wine list longer than a diner menu. But if you know where to look, about 2 miles past the big iron gates of Ashcombe Estate Vineyards, there's a smaller road. Gravel turns to dirt, and at the end of that road sits a farmhouse with a wraparound porch, 6 mismatched rocking chairs, a hand-painted sign that just says wine, honest, no fuss, and a woman named Carol Whitfield who, until 4 years ago, nobody outside this valley had ever heard of. This is her story, and it's the story of what happens when a corporation with $900 million in vineyard holdings buys the land around a small family farm, thinking they're about to make that farm irrelevant, and instead, they make it a legend. Carol didn't set out to compete with anybody. She inherited 11 acres of vineyard from her father, who inherited it from his father, who planted the first rows of Pinot Noir back in 1974, back when almost nobody in Oregon believed the grape could work outside of Burgundy. Her grandfather was one of the original gamblers, the small handful of growers who looked at the cool nights, the volcanic Jory soil, and the long, mild ripening season of the Willamette Valley, and thought, this might just be the closest thing to Burgundy that America has to offer. He was right. Today, the Willamette Valley is recognized as one of the finest Pinot Noir growing regions on Earth, and the soil under Carol's vines, that red, iron-rich Jory soil, formed from ancient volcanic basalt weathered over millions of years, is part of the reason why. Jory soil drains well, forces the vine's roots to dig deep for water, and that stress is exactly what makes a Pinot Noir grape concentrate its flavor. Winemakers have a saying, great wine is made in the vineyard, not the cellar. Carol's grandfather understood that, instinctively, decades before soil science caught up to him. For 50 years, the Whitfield family farm did what family farms do. It survived. Some years were lean. A frost in '84 wiped out most of the crop. A wet harvest in '96 forced them to pick early and settle for a lighter vintage. But the vines stayed. Old vines, Carol will tell you, are worth more than people think. A vine doesn't hit its full character until it's 15, 20 years old. By the time a vine turns 40, its root system has pushed so far into the bedrock that it barely needs irrigation at all. It's found its own water, deep in the fractures of the rock. Carol's oldest vines are 51 years old this year. There are vineyards 3 times the size of hers that would kill for root systems like that. She never expected to be running the place alone. Her husband, Dale, worked the land beside her for 22 years, until a heart attack took him in his sleep 4 winters ago. Their 2 kids had already moved to Portland and Seattle, chasing jobs that paid better and asked less of your back. So it was just Carol, out there most mornings by 6, walking the rows before the sun burned off the fog, checking for signs of powdery mildew, a real and constant threat in a damp climate like the Willamette, where humidity can turn a healthy leaf into a chalky, disease-covered one within days if you're not paying attention. She did it the old way. No massive tractors. The soil on her slope was too steep, and heavy machinery compacts soil in a way that suffocates root systems over time. She hand-pruned. She hand-picked. When people ask her why she doesn't mechanize, she says something that stuck with a lot of people who've heard her say it. A machine picks a vine, a person picks a grape. Then, 3.5 years ago, the trucks showed up. Ashcombe Global, a wine and hospitality conglomerate with vineyards in Napa, Sonoma, Bordeaux, and Mendoza, and a market valuation that had just crossed $1 billion after a private equity buyout, purchased 460 acres surrounding Carol's small farm. The land had belonged to 3 different families before her, families who'd sold when the offers got too good to refuse, or when the next generation simply didn't want the vineyard life anymore. Ashcombe consolidated it all into one glittering development, a state-of-the-art production facility, a 12,000-square-foot tasting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, a helicopter pad for wine tourists flying in from Portland, and a marketing budget that Carol, by her own estimate, couldn't spend in 3 lifetimes. They surrounded her. Not maliciously, This is simply how corporate vineyard acquisition works in wine country now. Big producers buy up smaller, less efficient plots, not always for the grapes, but for the water rights, the elevation, and the appellation status. Because once you're official within a recognized American viticultural area, like the Willamette Valley or one of its sub-appellations, your bottles can legally use that name on the label, and that name sells. Carol's 11 acres sat right in the middle of one of the most prized microclimates in the subregion. A gentle north-facing slope that gets just enough afternoon shade to slow ripening and preserve acidity, which is exactly what gives Willamette Pinot Noir its signature bright, structured character, instead of the jammy, overripe flavor you get from grapes grown in full, unbroken sun. Ashcombe made her an offer. Multiple offers, actually, over the course of 18 months. Company representatives in pressed shirts sat at her kitchen table with folders full of numbers that would have let her retire comfortably, maybe move somewhere warm, never touch another pruning shear again. She said no every time, not out of spite, not out of stubbornness for its own sake. She said no because, as she put it in an interview later, that dirt raised 3 generations of my family. I wasn't going to be the one who sold it to a company that would probably just rip the old vines out anyway and replant with high-yield clones. And she wasn't wrong to worry about that. It's a well-documented pattern in large-scale vineyard consolidation. Corporate buyers frequently replace older, lower-yield vines with modern clonal selections bred for consistency and higher tonnage per acre, prioritizing predictable output over the complexity that old vines develop over decades. It's not evil. It's just business. But it's also, to someone like Carol, a kind of quiet erasure of history, so she stayed. And Ashcombe built their empire right up to her property line. For the first year, everyone assumed Carol was finished. How does an 11-acre operation with a hand-painted porch sign compete with floor-to-ceiling windows, a 12,000-square-foot tasting room, and a marketing team that runs national ad campaigns? Ashcombe's tasting room served flights of 6 wines with a trained sommelier narrating each pour, live music on weekends, a wood-fired pizza truck parked out front, and valet parking for guests arriving by limousine from wine country tours out of Portland and McMinnville. Carol had a card table with a checkered cloth, a cooler, and 6 mismatched rocking chairs. But something started happening that nobody at Ashcombe saw coming. Visitors would do the big tasting room first, the glossy experience, the photo-perfect view, the professionally poured flights. And then, on their way back down the valley road, they'd notice the little hand-painted sign. Some stopped out of curiosity. Some stopped because the big tasting room, for all its polish, had felt a little hollow. 20-minute waits, a $45 tasting fee, a sommelier reciting facts from a laminated card, wine poured by staff, who, by their own admission when asked directly, had never actually walked the vineyard rows themselves. At Carol's Porch, you got Carol. She'd pour you a glass of her Pinot Noir, the same one more or less her grandfather started making in the 70s, from vines that in some rows still traced back to those original 1974 plantings. And she'd tell you exactly which slope it came from, what the frost pressure had been like that spring, why this vintage had slightly higher acidity because of a wetter September. She'd explain, if you asked why she still hand harvests, because a machine harvester shakes the whole vine, pulling off unripe berries, leaves, sometimes even small stems, along with the good fruit, and that debris, called material other than grape, or MOG in the industry, can introduce bitter, vegetal flavors into the wine if it's not sorted out. Hand-picking lets her selectively choose only the ripest clusters, one vine at a time. People didn't just taste wine on Carol's Porch. They learned something. They left feeling like they understood the valley a little better than when they arrived. And in an industry that runs on emotional connection and storytelling as much as it runs on flavor profiles, that mattered more than anyone at Ashcombe's corporate office had accounted for. Word got around. Slowly, at first. A regional food blogger wrote about the porch behind the billion-dollar vineyard that served better wine and better stories for a third of the price. Then a local news segment did a 5-minute piece on her. Then a young couple posted a video of their visit that quietly picked up 2 million views, mostly from people who said some version of the same thing in the comments. This is what wine country used to feel like. By her third harvest after Ashcombe moved in, Carol's small tasting operation, 30 bottles a week, sold straight off that porch, no middleman, no distributor cut, was outselling, per square foot, one of the most expensive tasting room builds in the state's history. Ashcombe's foot traffic didn't collapse. It's a big, beautiful facility, and it still pulls crowds. But something had shifted. Visitors increasingly treated the big house as the appetizer, and Carol's porch as the main course. Some tour groups, coordinated by local guides who noticed the pattern, started booking Ashcombe first and Carol second, specifically because guests kept requesting it. There's a real practical lesson buried in this story, and it's worth sitting with, because it's not really about wine at all. It's about what people are actually buying when they hand over money for something grown from the earth. Agricultural economists have a term for it: provenance premium, the added value a product carries when the buyer can trace it back to a specific place, a specific grower, a specific set of hands. It's the same reason a farmer's market tomato commands double the price of a grocery store tomato that tastes almost identical. It's not really about flavor difference alone. It's about trust, transparency, and story. Large operations, no matter how well funded, struggle to replicate that authenticity at scale, because authenticity, almost by definition, resists mass production. Carol never had a marketing department. She had 50 years of dirt under her fingernails and a willingness to stand on her own porch and tell the truth about her grapes. And in an era where so much of what we buy feels manufactured, distant, and impersonal, that turned out to be the rarest, most valuable thing in the entire valley. None of this means the big vineyard is the villain of the story. Ashcombe employs over 300 people in that valley now: vineyard workers, hospitality staff, delivery drivers, bottling line technicians. Their scale allows them to invest in expensive sustainability infrastructure that a small farm like Carol's could never afford alone. Solar-powered irrigation pumps, water reclamation systems, soil moisture sensors buried throughout the vineyard that feed data back to a central system, letting them irrigate with surgical precision instead of guesswork. That kind of technology genuinely reduces water waste, and in a state where summer droughts have become more frequent and more severe over the past 2 decades, that matters for the whole valley, not just their bottom line. In fact, Carol will tell you, without an ounce of bitterness, that Ashcombe's arrival probably saved her farm rather than threatened it. Before they came, she was seriously considering selling out of sheer exhaustion. The loneliness of running 11 acres alone after Dale passed, the crushing cost of specialized farm equipment, the isolation of a farm at the end of a gravel road that almost nobody driving through the valley knew existed. Ashcombe's massive tasting room, ironically, became her best source of foot traffic. Every visitor who drove up that valley road to see the billion-dollar view was a potential visitor to her porch 2 miles further down. She didn't beat the giant. In a strange, very American, very rural way, she partnered with it, without either of them ever signing a single contract. Today, Carol still gets up most mornings before 6. She still walks the rows in the fog, still checks the underside of the leaves for the telltale white dust of mildew, still prunes by hand in the dead of winter with fingers that ache more than they used to. Her daughter, watching the story unfold from Seattle, moved back home 18 months ago, something Carol says she never expected and still gets a little emotional talking about. Together they've expanded the porch operation, added 2 more chairs, started shipping a small allocation of bottles to loyal customers across the country, and, remarkably, to a small but growing group of buyers in the Netherlands, where Dutch wine enthusiasts had discovered her story online and started requesting bottles directly. She hasn't added a website with online checkout. She hasn't hired a publicist. She still just answers her own phone and tells people, if they want a bottle, to come sit on the porch and talk with her about it first. In an industry increasingly defined by billion-dollar acquisitions, algorithm-driven marketing, and hospitality experiences engineered down to the last detail, Carol Whitfield's 11 acres and 6 mismatched rocking chairs are a reminder of something simple, and something a lot of us, whether we grow grapes, tomatoes, or nothing at all, probably needed to hear again: the biggest operation in the valley isn't always the one that wins the customer's heart. Sometimes it's just the porch at the end of the gravel road, where somebody who actually grew the thing you're drinking is willing to sit down, pour you a glass, and tell you the truth about it. That's it for this one. If you want to see more stories like Carol's, real farms, real families, real land that refused to disappear, make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you on the next one.